500,000 cars, nearly all of them gone. And yet, you have probably never once heard anyone seriously bring up the Austin A40 Devon in a conversation about great British motor cars. Think about that. 450,000 units built in 5 years, exported to America, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. For several years in the early 1950s, the Austin A40 was the best-selling imported car in the entire United States, consistently. Not a lucky season, years of sustained dominance over every other foreign car on the American market. And still, silence. No sweeping documentary, no glossy magazine spread soaked in nostalgia, no iconic cameo in a landmark British film, nothing you could point to and say there it is, that car. Meanwhile, the Morris Minor, with fewer total sales, has thousands of passionate members in its owners' club and a permanent seat in the national memory. The Volkswagen Beetle is probably the most culturally recognized car of the 20th century. The Mini has appeared in fashion campaigns, heist films, and conversations from London to Los Angeles. The Devon built the road they all drove on, and then it vanished without a ceremony. This video is about why. Not just the car, though this car has a story worth every minute, but about why certain machines become legends, while others become footnotes. About the distance between commercial success and cultural immortality. And about a chapter of British history that most people were simply never told about clearly enough. Because the Austin A40 Devon was not just a family saloon, it was a financial instrument. A government directive pressed into steel and cast iron. A piece of national economic strategy assembled in Birmingham and shipped across the Atlantic at a deliberate loss to keep a nearly bankrupt country on its feet. Nobody put that on the showroom poster. By the time we finish here, you will look at post-war Britain and every car that came out of it in a completely different light. Let us go back to the beginning. And the beginning, in this case, smells like gunpowder, rationing cards, and a factory floor in Birmingham that had spent 6 years building Lancaster bombers instead of family saloons. Britain in 1945 had won the war. But winning came with a balance sheet that very few people wanted to face. The country was teetering on the edge of financial collapse. American dollars were critically short. The new Labour government needed hard foreign currency fast, and only one domestic industry could deliver it at the scale required. The motor industry. The instruction came without softening. British manufacturers were required to export at least 3/4 of everything they produced. Not a target, a mandate. And no company felt the full weight of that order more directly than Austin, sitting at Longbridge in Birmingham, with a brand new model on the drawing board and a country's fragile finances quietly resting on its roof. That car was the A40 Devon, and this is where things start to get interesting. Leonard Lord was not a sentimental man, precise, impatient, and absolutely clear about what he wanted. He had joined Austin in 1938 after a bitter falling out with William Morris, and from day one at Longbridge had one fixed idea: Austin would lead, not follow. The day after VE Day in 1945, Austin announced a new model. It was a statement of intent. But Lord knew he needed something producible in serious numbers, affordable, and exportable at volume. Something that could be loaded onto ships and sold to working families in Ohio and Queensland without requiring them to think too hard about it. That something became the A40 Devon. Riccardo Berzi, known to everyone at Longbridge as Dick, a designer trained at Lancia in Italy, took on the styling. What he produced was genuinely handsome for its era. Rounded wings flowing into the body. Headlights partially integrated into the front fenders. A roofline that curved cleanly without looking awkward. It looked, in a deliberate way, American, or rather, what an English designer thought Americans expected a modern car to look like. Under the skin, the engineering told a different story, and this is the part nobody tends to mention. The engine was genuinely new, a 1.2-liter 4-cylinder unit with an overhead valve configuration, producing 40 brake horsepower. When the Motor magazine tested a Devon in 1948, they found it would cruise above 60 miles an hour and touch 70 at full stretch. Fuel consumption came in at 34 miles per imperial gallon. For a car of that size and price, those were entirely respectable numbers. But beneath that modern engine sat a traditional separate chassis body on frame, solid rear axle, semi-elliptic leaf springs at the back, brakes that were hydraulic at the front and still mechanically operated at the rear on the early cars. It was, in one machine, two different decades arguing with each other. Progressive where it suited the accountants, conservative where the engineers had run out of time. Leonard Lord's tight schedule had not allowed the luxury of adventurous engineering throughout. The Devon was previewed to the press at the Paris Motor Show in October of 1947. The reaction was immediate and, in its polite English way, brutal. Reporters noted the car's conservative appearance and expressed disappointment. They were not entirely wrong, but Lord was not designing for the press. He was designing for export volumes. And on that measure, what happened next is one of the stranger and less told stories in British industrial history. Because in 1948, the Austin Motor Company produced tens of thousands of A40 Devons and shipped the overwhelming majority of them out of the country, to America, to Australia, to New Zealand, South Africa, Canada, wherever British-made cars could open a door and bring back foreign currency. Back home in Britain, in that same year, the total number of A40 Devons sold to domestic buyers was fewer than 80 cars. 80. In a full calendar year. Let that settle for a moment. The people building this car, working in Birmingham, assembling it on the line at Longbridge, could not buy one. Not simply because of the price, though that was part of it. There were purchase taxes that pushed the real cost significantly above the factory figure. There were restrictions on reselling a new car within a set period. There was petrol rationing. And underneath all of that, the unmistakable reality that the government needed the cars to go somewhere else. The domestic buyer was, for the time being, a very low priority. This was not a secret arrangement. It was explicit policy. Austin not only met the government's export benchmark, they surpassed it, comfortably. Almost every year the Devon was in production. In 1949, Austin built nearly 91,000 A40s. The majority went overseas. Production peaked that year, driven almost entirely by foreign demand. The domestic British car market was essentially frozen by taxation, rationing, and deliberate government steering of supply toward buyers abroad. So here is the uncomfortable truth at the heart of the Devon story. It was never really built for the people who lived in the country that needed it most. It was built for the people who could afford it somewhere else, so that Britain could survive another decade. Leonard Lord flew to the United States in early 1947 to assess the American market personally, bringing two prototype A40s across the Atlantic. He came back with a clear picture. Austin could compete there, but it would have to price aggressively and accept margins that made ordinary commercial logic uncomfortable. He was willing to do exactly that. In a Daily Mail interview in 1949, Lord admitted on the record that Austin had been selling cars to American buyers at prices so low, the company was operating at a loss on each one. His explanation was direct. It was, in his own words, a way of buying dollars for the Labour government. The cars were not just transport. They were a financial mechanism dressed in sheet metal and shipped across the ocean with a polite smile. By November of 1950, over $250,000 A40s had generated $70 million for Britain's treasury, $70 million. At a time when Britain was still rationing food for its own citizens. Now, if you are the kind of person who wants the full picture, the stories that most histories leave out, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit the bell so you do not miss what comes next. And drop a comment below telling me the first British car you ever remember riding in. I read every single one. Because what comes next in this story is where it genuinely starts to sting. The car responsible for that sting was not built in Birmingham. It was built, quietly and brilliantly, in Cowley, Oxford. And it was about to make the Devon look very tired, very fast. October 1948. The Earl's Court Motor Show. Austin had the Devon on display, a known quantity, moving steadily through its export program. Everything appeared on track. Then Morris unveiled the Minor. Alec Isigonis had designed something that looked like nothing else on the British road. A unibody shell, lighter, stiffer, no separate chassis. Rack and pinion steering that felt alive under your hands. A car with a personality, with a face, with something that felt almost affectionate. The press loved it. The public loved it. The Morris Minor Owners Club today has tens of thousands of members. It appeared in films and on postcards. It anchored summers and seaside holidays in the national imagination. The Devon and the Minor occupied the same price bracket and launched within a year of each other. One became an icon. The other became a footnote. Here is what makes that genuinely uncomfortable. The Devon was in several ways the better engineered car at launch. The OHV engine was more advanced than the side valve unit the early Minor used. The Devon was roomier, quieter, and more comfortable over distance. It offered more interior space for 4 adults. None of that mattered. The Minor had been designed to be loved. The Devon had been designed to serve a function. Those are two entirely different briefs, and they produce two entirely different outcomes across the decades. The Devon's other problem was sitting quietly in a factory in Wolfsburg, Germany. After the war, the Volkswagen works fell under British military control. Britain was effectively offered the Volkswagen factory and the rights to the Beetle for nothing. A piece of engineering that would become the most widely produced car in human history, handed to Britain as war reparations. They turned it down. The Beetle was assessed by British industry figures and dismissed as insufficiently commercial. No major British manufacturer wanted it. By 1955, Volkswagen sales in the United States were exploding. The Beetle had captured something in the American imagination that no Austin ever could. It overtook the A40 as America's favorite import and never looked back. Within a decade, it was a cultural symbol of an entire generation. The Devon had opened the door. It had done the groundwork, shipped the volume, proved the appetite. And then the Beetle, a car Britain could have owned, walked through that door and stayed forever. But this still is not the most troubling part of the Devon's ending. Because what happened next, in 1952 and the years that followed, goes beyond commercial disappointment into something more symbolic. Something that says everything about how Britain chose, or rather, chose not to remember this car. And it starts with 22 brand new Austin A40 Devon saloons sitting at the bottom of Vancouver's English Bay. In 1952, a small fleet of brand new Austin A40 Devon saloons was deliberately dumped into the ocean off the coast of Vancouver, Canada. 22 cars. Not wrecks. Not end-of-life vehicles. New cars, unsold, disposed of in the water. For a car that had spent 5 years being positioned as essential to Britain's economic survival, the vehicle that was bringing in the foreign currency that kept the lights on, the symbolism of that disposal is almost too heavy to process. But it was a signal of something real. The Devon's moment had passed, and the industry knew it. Austin had already introduced the A40 Somerset to replace it. No ceremony, no acknowledgement of what the Devon had accomplished. A new model number, a modestly updated body, and the Devon was discontinued. The cars that hadn't sold were handled as a logistical problem, not a legacy. At Longbridge, the future was already pointing elsewhere. The Austin A30 launched that same year and began attracting the domestic affection the Devon had never been allowed to earn. Then, in 1959, came the car that would define British motoring for generations. Isigonis again, the Mini, transverse engine, front-wheel drive, attitude, to spare, E.T. Films, fashion, racing, rebellion. The Mini was everything. The Devon was none of those things and had never been designed to be. The fate of surviving Devons tells the same story from a different angle. Many, particularly the two-door Dorset variant, were stripped and turned into drag races during the 1960s. Their short wheelbase and light weight made them attractive to the hot rod community. They were chopped, modified, fitted with American V8 engines, and run down quarter-mile strips until they broke. Not preserved, not restored, consumed. A car that had spent its entire production life being used instrumentally as a policy tool, as a currency mechanism. as a government directive in pressed steel, continued to be used instrumentally right to the end, always the means, never the monument. Today, surviving examples are genuinely rare. An average condition Devon is valued at around £5,000 sterling, with exceptional restored cars occasionally reaching closer to 15,000. The numbers of a car that history has set aside, valued quietly by people who know the real story, invisible to everyone else. The J40, a children's pedal car replica of the Devon produced through the 1950s, may actually outnumber surviving full-size originals today. A children's toy outlasting the thing it was copied from. You could not construct a more complete metaphor if you tried. So what does all of this actually mean? What is the lesson buried inside 450,000 units, $70 million, a Parisian press disappointment, a Vancouver seabed, and a generation of drag racers? It means something that goes well beyond motor cars, and it is something you already know, because you have seen it happen in other parts of life. Here is what the Austin A40 Devon actually was, seen clearly and without sentiment. It was a wartime economy measure with a peacetime body. Built under a tight schedule by people working under enormous pressure, styled to appeal to overseas buyers in markets Austin understood imperfectly. Priced below cost to bring in foreign currency for a government that needed it urgently. And it worked. By every measurable commercial standard, it worked extraordinarily well. The B-Series engine it introduced was genuinely modern and genuinely good. It formed the foundation for future Austin and British Motor Corporation designs that powered British cars well into the 1960s. The reliability that export customers experienced across 4 continents was not accidental. It was the result of serious engineering at a time when serious attention was in very short supply. But here is the question the Devon story forces you to ask, and it is not a comfortable one. Does doing exactly what you were asked to do at scale, under pressure, successfully guarantee you a place in memory? The answer is clearly no. Memory runs on emotion, not utility. On the moments when something mechanical crosses into something personal, when a car becomes the vehicle of a specific summer, a particular journey, a relationship, a coming of age, the minor earned that. The Mini earned it in overwhelming quantities. The Devon did not, because it was never sent into the world to be loved. It was sent to be useful. And there is something specific to the Devon's circumstances that accelerated its disappearance. The British buyers who might have formed that personal bond, the people who would have driven one home on a Saturday and taken the family to the coast on a bank holiday, were systematically prevented from having one. The car was for export. The emotional connection that builds cultural memory was deliberately directed away from the people closest to the factory. By the time domestic buyers could reasonably acquire an A40, something newer and more interesting was already available. That is not a design failure, not an engineering failure. It is a timing failure, built into the very reason the car existed at all. The Devon rebuilt Britain. It earned the dollars that kept factories open, workers paid, and a damaged country functioning while it found its feet. It did all of that without fanfare, without a starring role in any film, without a single memorable campaign that anyone today could quote back to you. It was, in the truest sense, a working car. It went to work. It did not stop. And when the work was finished, it was thanked with a replacement model and 22 units on the floor of Vancouver Harbour. That deserves to be said out loud, so I am saying it. If this gave you something, a story you did not know, a piece of history that sits differently now, hit the like button. Share it with one person who would appreciate it. Subscribe to this channel if you have not already, because this is exactly what we do here. The cars that actually change things, quietly, while nobody was paying attention. And leave a comment. Tell me what you remember, whether you rode in one, owned one, or simply had no idea this car existed until today. Those comments are the closest thing to a monument that Devon is likely to get. The Austin A40 Devon earned $70 million for a broken country and was thanked with silence. The least we can do is remember its name.